Iran's $40 billion gambit, the canal that could reshape global energy politics. When Washington terminated the exemptions allowing nations to purchase Iranian oil, Tehran found itself cornered. American naval forces began accumulating in the Persian Gulf waters, establishing what many observers describe as a maritime blockade designed to strangle Iran's ability to export its most valuable commodity. But rather than accepting defeat, Iran unveiled something audacious, a $40 billion infrastructure project that could fundamentally alter the geopolitical landscape of Central Asia and the Middle East. The proposal, a massive waterway stretching over 1,000 kilometers, connecting two critical bodies of water, the Caspian Sea in the north and the Persian Gulf in the south. This isn't just about moving oil, it's about survival, sovereignty, and honestly, the reshaping of regional power dynamics. Tehran extended an invitation to Beijing, hoping Chinese engineering prowess and investment capital could turn this ambitious vision into reality. Yet months have passed without a definitive answer from China. Meanwhile, Moscow has emerged as an unexpectedly enthusiastic supporter of the project. What explains Russia's keen interest? Why would this canal matter so profoundly to the Kremlin? And what's holding Beijing back from committing to what could be one of the century's most significant infrastructure undertakings? Before we dive deeper into this geopolitical chess game, if you're interested in understanding the forces shaping our world's economy and international relations, please subscribe and enable notifications so you never miss our analysis of global events that matter. Let's explore why a canal through Iranian territory has become one of the most consequential and contentious proposals in modern infrastructure history. The energy giant trapped by geography. Iran sits atop some of the planet's most abundant hydrocarbon reserves. The numbers tell a story of almost unimaginable wealth buried beneath Iranian soil and offshore waters. With approximately 34 trillion cubic meters of natural gas, Iran controls the world's second-largest reserves, representing more than 18% of all known global deposits. When it comes to petroleum, the picture remains equally impressive. Roughly 154 billion barrels of proven recoverable oil reserves, constituting about 9% of the world's total supply, and placing Iran fourth globally in this crucial resource. For the Iranian economy, energy exports aren't simply important, they're existential. More than half of all government revenue flows from the energy sector, making oil and gas the fundamental pillar supporting the entire national economy. Foreign currency earnings, government budgets, employment, and economic development all depend heavily on Iran's ability to extract, refine, and most critically export these resources to international markets. But there's a problem, a geographic and geopolitical stranglehold that has tightened progressively over the past 2 decades. Since the early 2000s, American military presence in the Strait of Hormuz has transformed this narrow waterway into a choke point that Washington can close at will. United States naval vessels patrol these waters constantly, and Iranian tankers have been intercepted, seized, and prevented from delivering their cargo to customers. These aren't isolated incidents, but rather components of a systematic strategy to constrain Iran's economic lifeline. The Strait of Hormuz, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, handles roughly 1/5 of the world's petroleum supply. For Iran, it represents both a gateway and a trap. Nearly all of Iran's oil exports must pass through this bottleneck, making the entire national economy vulnerable to blockade, sanctions, and military pressure. Faced with this vulnerability, Iranian planners began asking a fundamental question: what if we could bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely? A thousand-kilometer solution. In 2016, Iranian officials unveiled their answer, an engineering project of staggering ambition and complexity. The proposal called for constructing a navigable canal exceeding 1,000 kilometers in length, carving a path through Iranian territory to connect two critical water bodies that nature had left separated by hundreds of miles of mountains, deserts, and urban areas. The route, as conceived by Iranian engineers, would begin at the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, that vast inland body of water bordered by 5 nations. From there, the waterway would cut southward, passing near or through Tehran, Iran's capital and largest metropolitan area, with its population of over 9 million. Continuing southwest through the oil-rich Khuzestan province, the canal would ultimately terminate at Abadan, a port city of enormous strategic importance. Abadan isn't just any port. Situated on Abadan Island where the Karun River meets the Shatt al-Arab waterway, this city lies approximately 53 kilometers upstream from where the waterway empties into the Persian Gulf. More importantly, Abadan hosts one of the world's largest petroleum refining complexes. At its peak capacity, the Abadan refinery handles more than 60% of Iran's total oil refining output, processing crude oil into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and other petroleum products. Currently, oil extracted from southwestern Iranian fields travels to Abadan for refining and export through the Persian Gulf, meaning it must inevitably pass through the Strait of Hormuz and face potential American interdiction. The proposed canal would revolutionize this equation. Once operational, tankers could load refined products at Abadan, sail northward through the canal to the Caspian Sea, then navigate via existing river systems, the Volga or Ural rivers, into the Black Sea, from which they could access European and global markets through entirely different routes. This northern export pathway would completely circumvent the Strait of Hormuz and the American naval presence stationed there. But the strategic implications extend far beyond simply avoiding one problematic waterway. The Caspian, a hidden ocean of wealth. The Caspian Sea region represents one of Earth's most energy-dense areas. United States Department of Energy assessments estimate that geological formations beneath and around the Caspian contain approximately 200 billion barrels of oil, roughly 18% of all known global reserves. Natural gas deposits add another 14 trillion cubic meters, accounting for about 4% of worldwide reserves. As one of 5 littoral states surrounding the Caspian, alongside Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan, Iran naturally claims a portion of these resources. Yet the Caspian's peculiar geographic character creates unique challenges. Despite its name, the Caspian isn't technically a sea, but rather the world's largest enclosed inland water body. A saltwater lake covering approximately 370,000 square kilometers. It stretches roughly 1,200 kilometers from north to south and averages 320 kilometers in width. But here's the critical point. It has no natural connection to any ocean. This geographic isolation has profound economic consequences. Countries bordering the Caspian face extraordinary difficulties accessing global markets, particularly the economically dynamic regions of South Asia, East Asia, and East Africa. Energy analysts have noted that transporting Caspian oil to Western or Asian markets via Iranian routes could dramatically reduce both distance and cost compared to existing alternatives. This geographic and economic advantage explains why Washington has consistently sought to limit Iranian influence over Caspian energy flows, preferring routes through Turkey, Georgia, and other countries more aligned with American strategic interests. For years, Iran's Grand Canal vision remained exactly that, a vision. Despite the compelling strategic logic, the project faced 2 insurmountable obstacles: technical capability and economic resources. The $40 billion question. When Iranian engineers first calculated the requirements for such an undertaking, the numbers were, honestly, pretty sobering. Excavating, lining, and equipping a navigable canal of this scale would cost, well, about $40 million per kilometer. Multiply that across more than 1,000 kilometers, and the total price tag reaches $40 billion, an almost incomprehensible sum for a nation struggling under comprehensive international sanctions. Throughout the 2010s, Iran's economy staggered under the weight of Western sanctions targeting its banking sector, oil exports, and access to international markets. Government revenues plummeted, currency values collapsed, foreign investment disappeared. Under these conditions, finding $40 billion for a mega project was simply impossible, regardless of its strategic value. But by 2024, the situation had shifted. International sanctions remained in place, but Iran had adapted, developing workarounds and finding new trading partners willing to circumvent Western restrictions. Economic conditions, while still challenging, had stabilized somewhat. Tehran decided the moment had arrived to revive the Canal project. Iranian officials knew they couldn't finance or construct such a project alone. They needed a partner with three critical qualities: massive financial resources, world-class engineering expertise in large-scale infrastructure, and willingness to defy potential Western displeasure by cooperating with Iran. One nation seemed to fit all three criteria perfectly: China. Beijing's infrastructure superpower status. Over the past 2 decades, China has established itself as the undisputed global leader in infrastructure construction. Chinese companies have built high-speed rail networks spanning tens of thousands of kilometers, constructed some of the world's longest bridges and tallest skyscrapers, excavated massive hydroelectric facilities, and delivered port complexes from Southeast Asia to East Africa. The Belt and Road Initiative, China's signature foreign policy program, has invested hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure projects across more than 70 countries. Chinese state-owned enterprises possess the technical knowledge, equipment, workforce, and project management capabilities to execute virtually any construction project imaginable. Moreover, China and Iran have cultivated increasingly close bilateral relations over recent years, culminating in a comprehensive 25-year strategic cooperation agreement signed in 2021. This pact, covering economic ties, energy cooperation, and infrastructure development, included Chinese pledges to invest up to $400 billion in Iran over the agreement's duration. Chinese firms have already undertaken numerous Iranian infrastructure projects: railways, highways, port facilities, and power generation plants. The relationship exists, the framework is established, and the financial commitments have been made. Given all this, Iran naturally turned to China when ready to move forward with the Canal project. Tehran transmitted formal proposals, technical specifications, and investment terms to Beijing, expecting a relatively quick decision given the existing partnership framework. Yet months passed without a clear response. Chinese officials neither accepted nor rejected the proposal outright but remained non-committal, offering general expressions of interest without concrete commitments. The silence from Beijing proved especially notable because another major power had responded very differently. Why Moscow sees strategic gold. While China deliberated, Russia enthusiastically embraced the Iranian Canal proposal. Moscow's interest wasn't merely polite or diplomatic, it was urgent and strategic, rooted in geographic realities that have constrained Russian power for centuries. Look at a world map, and Russia's vast territory appears to touch 3 oceans: the Pacific in the east, the Arctic in the north, and the Atlantic, via the Baltic and Black Seas in the west. Yet despite this seemingly advantageous position, Russia has always lacked something crucial: reliable year-round access to warm water ports connecting to the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean matters immensely because it provides direct maritime access to the Middle East, South Asia, East Africa, and Southeast Asia, regions containing roughly half the world's population and an increasingly large share of global economic activity. Russia's existing routes to the Indian Ocean are circuitous, expensive, and vulnerable to blockade. Ships departing Russian Black Sea ports must navigate the Turkish Straits, sail through the Mediterranean, transit the Suez Canal, cross the Red Sea, and pass through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait before finally reaching the Indian Ocean. This journey covers thousands of nautical miles and crosses multiple choke points controlled by NATO members or their allies. Iran's proposed canal would change everything. Once operational, Russian vessels could sail down the Volga River into the Caspian Sea, cross into Iranian waters, navigate southward through the canal, and emerge directly into the Persian Gulf, which connects immediately to the Indian Ocean. The route would cut transportation distances by more than half compared to the Suez Canal pathway and eliminate all the geopolitical choke points where Western powers could interrupt Russian shipping. For Russian energy exports, the advantages would be even more pronounced. Russian oil and gas could flow to Asian markets via a route entirely controlled by friendly or neutral countries: Russia, Iran, and the open waters of the Indian Ocean. No Turkish straits, no Suez Canal, no vulnerability to Western naval interdiction. This matters more now than ever. Since the Ukraine conflict began, Russia's access to Baltic and Black Sea shipping has faced severe restrictions. NATO members control the Danish Straits connecting the Baltic to the Atlantic. Turkey, though not imposing sanctions, has implemented the Montreux Convention's provisions restricting warship movements through the Turkish Straits. Russia desperately needs alternative routes that bypass areas where Western pressure can disrupt commerce. But Russia's enthusiasm carries historical depth beyond current events. An imperial dream revived. Russia's interest in a Caspian-Persian Gulf Canal isn't new, actually. It's more than a century old. Back in the late 19th century, during the height of the so-called Great Game between Imperial Russia and the British Empire for control of Central Asia, Tsarist planners, they proposed exactly such a waterway. The strategic logic back then was, interestingly, identical to today: create a direct route to the Indian Ocean, eliminating dependence on routes controlled by rival powers. But that 19th century project never materialized, defeated by engineering challenges, financial constraints, and of course, geopolitical complications. Yet, the strategic imperative never disappeared from Russian thinking. Throughout the Soviet era and into modern times, Russian strategic planners have repeatedly revisited the concept, always reaching the same conclusion. Such a canal would dramatically enhance Russian power projection and economic reach. So, when Iran formally proposed the canal project and invited Chinese participation, Moscow saw an opportunity to finally realize this century-old strategic objective, not by building it themselves, but by supporting and facilitating a project that serves mutual interests. As a Caspian littoral state itself, Russia understands that controlling or influencing energy export routes from the Caspian region directly impacts its geopolitical position. If the canal gets built, Russia gains immensely even without paying for construction. It's really no surprise that Moscow has signaled strong support. Beyond Iran and Russia, the canal's impact wouldn't be limited to just those two countries. The project would fundamentally restructure the economic geography of an entire region. Let's remember, the Caspian Sea is bordered by 5 nations: Russia, Iran, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan. All 5 are, in effect, landlocked relative to the global ocean system, forced to use costly, time-consuming routes to reach international markets. Currently, energy and goods from Caspian states must follow that same complex pathway: rivers to the Black Sea, through the Turkish Straits, across the Mediterranean, through Suez, and finally to the Indian Ocean. Alternatively, they can ship overland through Russia, China, or southern routes through Iran and Pakistan, all expensive options involving multiple border crossings and infrastructure bottlenecks. An operational Iranian canal would transform Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan into effective maritime trading nations overnight. Ships from these countries could sail into the Caspian, transit southward through the Iranian Canal, and emerge with direct access to the Persian Gulf, Indian Ocean, and all the markets beyond: South Asia, East Africa, and even Australia. The economic implications here are staggering. Transportation costs would plummet, transit times would shrink, and trade volumes would expand. These currently isolated economies could integrate much more effectively with the global trading system. Even landlocked Central Asian nations without Caspian coastlines, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, would benefit indirectly. Improved connectivity for their Caspian neighbors would mean better access to ports and shipping for goods transported overland to Caspian ports, then shipped via the canal. Combined with rail and road networks, these countries would enjoy significantly improved import-export capabilities. For Iran, the benefits extend well beyond just collecting canal transit fees. Increased regional trade would create opportunities for Iranian businesses, stimulate economic development in provinces along the canal route, and position Iran as an indispensable transportation hub linking Central Asia, the Caspian region, and the Persian Gulf. This would help diversify Iran's economy beyond petroleum dependence and generate revenue streams less vulnerable to sanctions. The canal could literally reshape the economic and political landscape of Central Asia and the Middle East. Why not Russia as the builder? Given Russia's enthusiasm for the project, it's natural to wonder why Iran approached China rather than Moscow for the actual construction work. The answer really lies in Russia's current circumstances. The Ukraine conflict, now in its third year, has consumed enormous Russian resources: financial, military, industrial, and human. Western sanctions have targeted virtually every sector of the Russian economy, from banking and finance to technology and manufacturing. While Russia has adapted more effectively than many Western officials predicted, the combined pressure of wartime expenses and comprehensive sanctions leaves little capacity for undertaking massive infrastructure projects abroad. Moreover, Russian construction firms, while competent in certain areas, just don't possess the same breadth of mega-project experience that Chinese companies have accumulated. China has built more high-speed rail, longer bridges, deeper ports, and larger hydroelectric facilities than any other nation in recent decades. Chinese firms are simply better positioned to execute a project of this scale and complexity. Iran's choice of China also reflects the broader trajectory of their bilateral relationship. Since 2021, when both countries formalized their comprehensive cooperation agreement, economic and political ties have strengthened considerably. That agreement specifically highlighted infrastructure cooperation, with China committing to substantial investments in Iranian ports, railways, and roads. Chinese companies have already demonstrated their capabilities on Iranian soil through successfully completed projects. The relationship exists, trust has been established, and frameworks for cooperation are already in place. So, from Tehran's perspective, China represents the logical choice as primary contractor and financial partner. Yet months after Iran extended its invitation, Beijing has remained conspicuously silent. China's calculated hesitation. Why hasn't China committed to what appears to be a strategically valuable project aligned with Belt and Road Initiative objectives and existing Iran-China agreements? The answer involves, well, a complex calculation of risks, rewards, and timing. First, security concerns loom large. The Middle East has become progressively more volatile over the past several years. Armed conflicts continue in multiple countries across the region: Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and of course, the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Iran itself faces internal security challenges in some provinces and external threats from hostile neighbors and distant powers. For China to commit thousands of engineers, construction workers, and project managers to work in Iran for the decade or more required to complete the canal, Beijing must be confident about their safety. The question haunting Chinese decision-makers is, can Tehran credibly guarantee the security of Chinese personnel working on such an exposed, vulnerable infrastructure project stretching across more than 1,000 kilometers of Iranian territory? Recent history provides concerning precedents. Chinese workers abroad have been targeted by terrorist groups, insurgents, and criminal organizations from Pakistan to Myanmar to various African nations. A major attack on Chinese personnel would create enormous domestic political pressure on Beijing, potentially forcing withdrawal from the project and damaging China's international reputation. Second, the project risks triggering Western sanctions and diplomatic blowback. While China has shown increasing willingness to work with Iran despite American objections, a $40 billion infrastructure megaproject would represent a qualitatively different level of engagement. Washington would almost certainly impose sanctions on Chinese companies and financial institutions involved in the canal construction. European nations might follow suit. China's economic relationship with the West dwarfs its trade with Iran. Chinese exports to the United States and European Union measure in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually, while Iran-China trade amounts to perhaps 20 to 30 billion. The economic risk-reward calculation is complicated. Is helping Iran worth potentially jeopardizing market access in wealthier Western economies? Third, the project could upset regional balances and antagonize multiple countries simultaneously. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other Gulf Arab states view Iran as a strategic rival and wouldn't welcome an infrastructure project strengthening Iranian economic power. Turkey might object to competition with existing transit routes through Turkish territory. Even some Central Asian nations could have concerns about becoming more dependent on Iranian infrastructure. For China, which seeks to maintain workable relationships across the entire Middle East and Central Asia, taking sides too explicitly in regional rivalries carries diplomatic costs. Beijing generally prefers playing the role of neutral economic partner to all sides, rather than committing exclusively to one nation's strategic vision. Fourth, there's the question of financial viability. While $40 billion represents a manageable sum for Chinese state resources, any infrastructure project of this magnitude carries execution risks. Cost overruns, technical challenges, delays, and changing political conditions could easily push the final price tag significantly higher. Unlike some Belt and Road projects in Africa or Southeast Asia where China might recoup investments through resource extraction rights or controlling stakes in completed infrastructure, Iran's canal presents a less clear financial return mechanism.